Electronic rock, or simply electro rock, is a genre of music that blends the sounds and instruments of rock and roll with electronic instruments like synthesizers, samplers, and drum machines. Today, electro rock bands like Imagine Dragons, The Killers, Daft Punk, and Linkin Park are everywhere. But where did electro rock come from, and how did it become such an iconic part of the music landscape today? This is everything you need to know about electro rock. The story of electro rock is, like many things, the story of technology and convenience. In the early 1960s, synthetic sounds created by machines began appearing in pop songs. The Beatles famously used a mellotron, a keyboard-based synth, on 1967's Strawberry Fields Forever. And by the 1970s, synthesizers were commercially available. The machines began popping up everywhere. Brian Eno and Roxy Music used synths in their futuristic art rock take on glam rock. And in 1973, Pink Floyd released Dark Side of the Moon using a synth on several songs. Then in 1979, while in the studio recording a punk album with his band Tubeway Army, Gary Newman discovered a Mini Moog, which was a smaller version of the iconic Moog monophonic analog synthesizer. The band began incorporating the Mini Moog in their music and released Our Friends Electric, a song about a robot prostitute from the future. The track hit #1 in the UK and went gold. At the same time, bands like Joy Division began incorporating electronic instruments, ushering in the era of post-punk. By the early 80s, synthesizers cost about as much as a guitar and could do so much more. They were easier to learn and didn't require a full band. This led to a wave of new electro rock bands like Depeche Mode, Devo, and New Order, founded by the surviving members of Joy Division, and a generation of European techno artists who grew up on the electro rock of the 80s, influencing techno house and EDM. In the 1990s and 2000s, electro rock groups like Nine Inch Nails, Panic at the Disco, and LCD Sound System expanded the genre even further. What unites all these groups is a uniquely electro rock sound. The sound of electro rock, like all electronic music, is the sound of the future. Electro rock sound has been called things like atmospheric soundscapes, sounds without limitations of time or human ability, sounds that transcend melody, and sounds free from ego of instruments or musicians. But at its core, it still maintains the elements of rock and roll, with a heavy beat and a repetitive phrase structure. While rock and roll is an American creation, electro rock has its roots throughout Europe, especially Germany and the United Kingdom. The sound reflects the intersection of cultures and technology in the mid to late 20th century, united by the changing tide of popular music and the commercial availability of the synthesizer. Synthesizers can mimic other instruments, but they can also manipulate audio and create brand new sounds that can't be made by traditional instruments. They can loop endlessly, modulate, overlap tones, play with reverb and feedback in ways analog could never imagine. The introduction of synthetic sounds opened the doors of creativity and artistry that broke the mold for music. For decades, rock and roll icons like Paul McCartney, Mick Jagger, Eric Clapton, and even Neil Young incorporated electronic sounds into their rock albums. They embraced the changing culture and technologies like the synthesizer. But there was one band that captured and epitomised the sound more than any other and would serve as the blueprint for generations of future musicians. Dusseldorf's krautrock band, Kraftwerk. Kraftwerk were pioneers in the electronic rock scene. The band began in 1968 when founders Florian Schneider and Ralf Hütter met at the Academy of Arts in Remscheid near Dusseldorf. They were both studying music and shared an interest in improvisation and avant-garde electronics. The choice of the name Kraftwerk bucked the trend of European bands using English names. Kraftwerk means power plant, and Hütter referred to the members as Musikarbeiter, musical workers. The choice to sing in German, despite being less commercially viable than English, was also deliberate. Hütter told Cream magazine in 1975, "We create out of the German language, the mother language, which is very mechanical, we use as the basic structure of our music. Also the machines for the industries of Germany." In 1974, they released a 24-minute-long song called Autobahn. The song embraced the sleek machinery of the automobile, a stark contrast to the American machismo of car culture. The radio edit went to number 11 on the charts in 1975. In 1981, they released Computer World, which would serve as a template for generations of electronic rock bands to come. Numbers, with its funky robot melody, became a breakout single from the album and a DJ favourite. Kraftwerk had a variety of famous fans who were influenced by their work. David Bowie was so enamoured by them, he played their album before concerts and gushed about them to the mainstream press. They heavily influenced his 1977 albums Low and Heroes, which he described as a euphoric language of sounds. Hundreds of other artists have used sounds created by Kraftwerk.
They've directly influenced everyone from Coldplay to Jay-Z.
Specifically, they had a huge influence on hip-hop in its infancy. Afrika Bambaata's pioneering 1982 track Planet Rock featured a distinctively Kraftwerk melody. In 1998, Bambaata said, "I always was into Trans-Europa Express, and after Kraftwerk put Numbers out, I said, I wonder if I can combine the two to make something really funky with a hard bass and a beat." So we combined them. Prince, Parliament Funkadelic and other African-American artists from the 1980s were seduced by Kraftwerk's mechanical machine-made sounds. They were without a doubt one of the most influential electro rock groups of all time. They defined the genre, the aesthetic and the sound. But they couldn't have done any of it without the technology. The backbone of electronic music is the synthesizer. Put simply, a synthesizer is a machine that creates synthetic sounds. The history of man-made sounds can be traced back to the 19th century and the electromechanic piano, which used electromagnets to trigger sound. In 1905, German scientist Hermann von Helmholtz invented the sound synthesizer, which used overtones and filtering to create sounds. Electronic keyboards came about in the 1930s. And in 1952, the first machine capable of artificially creating sound was developed by RCA. Then, in 1964, Robert Moog debuted the modular voltage-controlled synthesizer, which he named after himself. Throughout the 1970s, synthesizers began to be produced on an industrial scale and became more accessible to the masses. In 1980, the company Roland released the first fully programmable drum machine, the TR-808. But by 1983, they stopped production and 808s began showing up in second-hand shops and became affordable for young musicians. At the same time, computing became more widespread and personal studios began appearing. This led to the eventual explosion of virtual digital music we know today. Electro rock is all about the future. As technology advances more and more, artists will create new, funky sounds to play with. Subgenres like industrial rock, synth pop, and electro clash will continue to thrive, and new ones will pop up. In recent years, artists like futurist pop singer-songwriter Grimes have begun releasing songs that definitely fall into the electro rock category. And English indie rock band The 1975 have embraced electro rock as part of their sound. Meanwhile, the song Heatwaves by electro rock band Glass Animals hit #1 in the Billboard charts in March of 2022, proving electro rock's popularity and staying power. Other contemporary electro rock bands like Rat-a-Tat and 21 Pilots continue to find mainstream success and collaborate with artists from every genre imaginable, ensuring electro rock will live on and adapt with the times. And as more and more concerts take place in the metaverse, electro rock is ready to go virtual. The landscape will evolve with science, but the ethos of rock and roll will continue as the through line that connects past, present and future. The information in this video came from these sources. Check them out to learn more.